9,000 years ago, thousands of people lived in this town, and there was not a single street, no roads, no doors at ground level. To go home, you climbed onto the roofs, walked across the entire settlement from above, and dropped down through a hole in your own ceiling. The place is called Catalhoyuk. It sits on a plain in central Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. And when archaeologists first started digging into its mound in the 1960s, they found something that broke every rule they thought they knew about early towns. There was no main gate, no market square, no temple rising above the houses. In fact, there were no houses standing alone at all. Every single home shared its walls with the next, packed together so tightly that the whole town was one continuous mass of mud brick. Hundreds of rooms fused into a single sprawling structure. And here is the part that stops you cold. Nobody entered from the side. There were no front doors. The only way in was straight down, through a hole cut in the flat roof, using a wooden ladder. So the roofs weren't just roofs. They were the streets. They were the plaza, the walkway, the workplace, the road. The entire life of this town happened up on top, and then dropped down into the dark. But why on earth would thousands of people choose to live like this? The answer is stranger than the question. Picture the town from above at first light. The rooftops are alive. People move across them from house to house, stepping over openings, climbing up and down ladders. Ovens sit out in the open air, because you couldn't safely bake bread inside a windowless room full of smoke. Grain is spread to dry. Children play at the edges. This flat, unbroken surface is where the community actually lived its public life. At the height of the town, historians estimate somewhere between 3,500 and 8,000 people lived here. The numbers are debated, but by any measure, it was enormous for its time. These were among the first farmers. They grew wheat and barley, they herded sheep and goats, and they still hunted the wild cattle that roamed the plain. Below their feet, the mound was already growing, because when a house wore out, they didn't clear it away. They filled it in, flattened it, and built a new house directly on top, in almost exactly the same spot. Home stacked on home, generation after generation, for more than 1,000 years. That slow burial of house upon house is what raised the whole settlement into the great hill we dig into today. And this was around 7,000 BC. That is thousands of years before the first pyramids of Egypt, thousands of years before Stonehenge, before writing, before the wheel had spread. These people had none of that, and yet they built and ran a settlement of thousands, held together not by streets and walls, but by a shared surface in the sky. Below that surface, though, the houses hid something far more intimate and far more unsettling. Drop through the roof hatch, and you enter a small rectangular room, maybe 5 meters across. It's dim. The only light comes from the hole above and the glow of the hearth by the entrance. The walls are smooth white plaster, recoated again and again over the years. Along one side are raised platforms. This is where the family sat, worked, and slept. The floors tell their own story. The people of Catalhoyuk were meticulously, almost obsessively clean. They swept their homes constantly and replastered the floors in careful layers. An archaeologist noticed something curious. The plaster on one side of the room was often dirtier, scuffed by daily activity, while the other side, near the platforms, was kept spotless. There were, in effect, dirty areas and clean areas marked out inside a single windowless room 9,000 years ago. Everything had its place, and remarkably, almost every house followed the same layout. Same size, same features. The hearth here, the platforms there. That uniformity is one of the most striking things about Catalhoyuk. There are no grand mansions, no palaces, no throne rooms, no house that shouts, "A ruler lived here." The evidence suggests a remarkably flat, egalitarian society, thousands of people with no obvious king, no visible ruling class, everyone housed in roughly the same modest space. But the plaster walls were not bare. They were covered in something that turns a simple home into a shrine and a graveyard. On the walls, the people of Catalhoyuk painted red ochre hunting scenes, figures chasing enormous wild bulls and stags. In some houses, real horns and skulls of wild cattle were set into the walls and benches, plaster molded around actual bullhorns, jutting out into the room. These installations, called bukrania, made the home feel like a living altar to the animals they hunted and feared. And there is one painting that has become famous and fiercely argued over. A wall covered in small boxy shapes, row upon row, with a great two-peaked mountain above them, spotted and streaked as if erupting. Some researchers have called it the oldest map in the world, a plan of the town itself, with the nearby volcano exploding behind it. Others say that is reading too much into it, and the shapes may be an abstract pattern, or something else entirely. The truth is, we don't know for certain, but the possibility alone is staggering. And then there is what lay beneath the floor. Because the people of Catalhoyuk did not bury their dead outside the town. They buried them inside the house, under the very platforms where the living slept. Generation after generation, families interred their ancestors right below their beds. Some skulls were later dug back up, plastered, painted to resemble the living face, and kept, passed between houses, cradled, buried again. To these people, the dead did not leave the household. They stayed. They were part of it, sleeping beneath the family, watching over the house, folded into the very structure of the home. To live in this town was to sleep every single night, directly above your own dead. So what would make an entire society choose a life like this? There is no single answer, and honestly no one alive knows for sure. But the evidence points to a few powerful reasons. The first is defense and shelter. A town with no streets and no ground-level doors is a fortress by design. There's no alley for a raider to slip down, no door to break in. Pull up your ladder, and your only entrance is a hole in the roof several meters up. The exterior wall of the whole settlement was effectively one unbroken barrier. It may also have sheltered the interior from the harsh winds of the open plain. The second reason is deeper. It's about holding a community together. When your home is fused to your neighbors, when your ancestors lie beneath your floor, when your walls carry the same paintings and the same horns as everyone else's, you are bound to the group in a way we can barely imagine. This wasn't a town of individuals. It was a single living organism of mud brick and memory. And that raises a question that changes how we see human history itself. We tend to assume the first towns must have had kings, temples, and rulers to organize them. Catalhoyuk suggests otherwise, that thousands of people, 9,000 years ago, may have lived together in dense, ordered harmony with no ruler at all. But we should be careful with the words we use, because calling this place a city starts an argument that still isn't settled. You'll often hear Catalhoyuk called the world's oldest city. It's a thrilling claim, but most archaeologists would gently push back. A true city, in the way we usually mean it, has specialization, hierarchy, central authority, the machinery of a state. Catalhoyuk had none of that visible, no government, no clear division of labor, no ruling elite. What it had was scale, thousands of people living together without the structure we assume that scale requires. So maybe it isn't a city at all. Maybe it's a proto-city, an experiment in living together on a massive scale, thousands of years before the idea of the city was even invented. A thing so early, it barely fits our vocabulary. They walked across their roofs. They slept above their dead. They painted the world onto their walls. And then, over centuries, they left. And the town they built collapsed slowly back into the earth it was made from. For 9,000 years, the town with no streets waited under a hill in Anatolia to tell us that everything we assumed about how humans first came together might be wrong. If this changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe. We reconstruct the lost world every week.